Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol. The rematch is here. Beterbiev is 21-0 with 20 KOs, and Bivol is 23-1 with 12 KOs, and of course that one loss coming via the hands of Beterbiev in their previous matchup. Now, this is definitely an intriguing matchup for the same reason it was in their first fight, which is that we have two gentlemen who are the product of the Russian amateur boxing system, with one major difference, and I will double back to that in a bit. And the second reason, of course, is that it was such a close fight in their first encounter, a 7-5 majority decision. Well, in my opinion, I felt that Beterbiev did win that fight, but I can understand how there are those who would favor Dmitry Bivol and say, no, it was Bivol's fight. A 7-5 majority decision is very close. Of course, it could have gone 7-5 in Dmitry's favor, or it could have been called a draw. But either way, it was so nice that we're going to do it twice. Now, that said, I don't honestly think that in the rematch we are going to see some major technical differences from either Artur Beterbiev or Dmitry Bivol. That's because both men have spent so much time and energy developing as fighters that their identity is fairly solidified at this point. In a nutshell, we see Dmitry Bivol as the boxer, the one who's going to move around more, and we see Beterbiev as the power puncher, who may throw fewer punches, but the punches he does land are very hard. That's a very simplistic summary because, of course, some of the most interesting moments in their first encounter came when Dmitry Bivol decided he's going to switch the roles and be the one pushing Artur Beterbiev back, and Artur was forced to fight moving around and a little more on his back foot, as we say. Because both men are a product of the Russian amateur boxing system, I do want to speak a little bit in general about how that style or school of boxing works. Now, it's important to note that the characteristics that I'm going to describe are not the only way that Russian fighters fight. There's other schools of Russian boxing that use more of a walking style. I'll point to Roman Karmazin as an example. Now, those fighters are actually very hard. Their objective is to land with a lot of hard power. But as far as I know, Roman Karmazin was not a product of the Russian amateur system. I believe he learned his boxing skills while he was in the Russian military. Now, the most important aspect or key aspect about that Russian amateur system is that at some point they gamified amateur boxing. What I mean by that is they figured out a way or a system that they could teach all their potential boxing athletes how to fight a certain way that would optimize the possibility of them winning an amateur boxing fight. Now, that makes sense in a communist country where there's no option for the fighter to turn pro, and so therefore there's no incentive for a boxing coach to teach their fighter how to potentially develop skills that they will need as a professional boxer. That's really the complete opposite, I think, of an American coach's mindset, because of course, in many cases, the amateur boxing coach's hope is that they're investing all this time and probably some of their own funds in this youngster, hoping that this person will eventually turn into a professional fighter and then generate some income for both of them. So it's in that boxing trainer's best interest, meaning an American or UK trainer, it's in their best interest to start developing their young fighter in a way that will transition over to the professional boxing game down the road. But there's no such incentive whatsoever for the Russian amateur boxing coaches because they don't really have that as an option, right? Instead, they're going to get rewarded for bringing home those medals from all these amateur competitions, of course, culminating in the Olympic Games and World Championships. So the key difference here is, of course, amateur boxing, I think it's 3-minute rounds. You score points. That's a different sort of objective than professional fighting, right? Knocking your opponent down is given the same value as landing your jab. So just because you knock somebody down doesn't mean you're going to win the round as an amateur boxer. So what I'm getting at here is you can see there's not a heck of a lot of incentive for a coach to try to really emphasize power shots or body shots for that matter. The sort of motto for amateur boxing is really touch and don't get touched, not hit and don't get hit. Okay, so as long as you're clear that the objective of this amateur game is to score points and not necessarily put damage on your opponent, let's take a look at the characteristics of this style. So, lead hand. First thing that's most obvious is the lead hand, the jab hand, is held at 90 degrees, meaning the elbow is almost at shoulder level, and then the forearm is almost straight up, pointing at the ceiling. Now that jab hand is used, it's almost in perpetual motion. It's describing little circles in a kind of pawing motion forward and around, or it's making circles in kind of a counterclockwise motion. If you recall Usyk's last fight with Fury, where Fury decided he's actually going to start using a jab, Usyk's response to that was to use that same type of Eastern European jab hand motion to sort of win the jab war with Tyson Fury. Now, the purpose of that sort of perpetual motion with the jab hand, I think, is to try to confuse the opponent, to make it so that it's not clear when that punch is coming, and it's also to kind of create a bit of a shield in motion, so it makes it hard for their opponent to know when they can throw their jab. Now, their other hand, the rear hand, is kept glued right to the chin. There's not a lot of slipping and dipping, bobbing and weaving in that Russian amateur style. Instead, the majority of the defense is really done by the feet. So the Russian amateur boxers are constantly bouncing on the balls of their feet. And because their objective is to score points, they're going to move in and out, in to score the points, retreat straight back out, and then they move side to evade their opponent's response and then to try to set up their next attack. So what'll happen is they'll go in, out, and cut to one side. As soon as their opponent moves forward to try to cut them off on that side, that's when they'll do their little weave motion and cut back out in the opposite direction. Again, so it's always forward, backwards, right, or left. But there's really not a lot of motion at that 45-degree angle. Now, as far as the inside game goes, it's very little inside fighting from most Eastern European fighters. And again, I believe this is part of the whole gamification aspect, because it's harder for judges to score body punches. It's much harder for them to see action when two fighters are fighting on the inside. In the professional game, you don't care about what the judges see. You just care about landing your hard shots on the inside, because you figure that that's going to pay dividends down the road, or maybe even in that round. Okay, so now that we understand a little bit about the system that both Beterbiev and Bivol were raised under, let's take a look at that one major difference I spoke about in terms of their amateur careers. And that is that Dmitry Bivol spent most of his amateur career fighting other Eastern European fighters in that region of the world. So arguably, Dmitry Bivol might be one of the best at fighting in that Eastern European style. But Artur Beterbiev, on the other hand, had more international exposure. So he had to figure out how to use his style of boxing versus, North American and other European fighters. He had a chance to test his style, if that's what you want to call it, out. But almost, I think, more importantly, for whatever reason, Artur Beterbiev was asked or told, I'm going to figure it was told, he was told that he had to move up to cruiserweight and then sometimes even heavyweight. Now, he does not look like a big man at light heavyweight, so I think he just had to gain weight to make a cruiser or heavyweight. In other words, it's not like he then, let's put it this way, he does look a little bit almost fluffy if you look at photographs from when he was fighting at those heavier weights, understandably so. Now the point is, Artur Beterbiev was fighting heavier men in his smaller light heavyweight frame. So he had to adapt and come up with something new. He had to find a solution to a problem. And this is because there's really no way a smaller framed person can win versus a larger framed person using that same Eastern European style. That style is going to favor the person with the reach advantage because it's just predicated on, scoring points. So I think this is where Beterbiev figured out, I need to develop some type of differential here, and that for him was his power, number one, and it was also being able to close distance rapidly, which kind of looks like sometimes he's leaping in, but when you practice that enough times under duress, you figure out the proper timing for these risky moves. If you're going to be the always smaller person in that fight, you are going to have to take some risks, but during the course of practice and actual competition, you'll figure out how to nail down that absolutely impeccable timing to take those risky moves. Okay, so now that we understand a little bit about the background that Beterbiev and Bivol come from, let's take a look at specific technical aspects of both fighters' games. I'll start with the challenger, Beterbiev-Bivol. Now, I have to admit that in the first fight, I was somewhat surprised that instead of holding his lead hand up in that traditional Eastern European guard, Dmitry retracted his hand a bit and held it closer to his head. The main reason he did that was to protect himself from the left hook of Artur Beterbiev. Now that's that one key thing with that Russian amateur style is that by holding that lead hand in that position away from the head, open to a left hook. The second aspect of Dmitry Bivol's defense that is excellent was his absolutely fluid movement. Bivol was really terrific at moving laterally and especially weaving and then to switch directions. At moments, I feel like Dmitry Bivol's footwork is just really pure artistry. In terms of offense, Bivol has a very sharp, fast jab. I feel like his jab right hand, perfect straight right hand, is his strongest weapon. And Bivol is also a terrific combination puncher and finisher. When he feels that it's his moment, he knows how to just unload with rapid fire, good variety of punches, and Bivol can string together an almost unbelievable number of punches in this extended combination. And hand in hand in being able to suddenly string together very long combinations is that Bivol knows how to vary the pace of the fight. Now that said, I do have a few concerns about Bivol's in terms of Bivol's technique in terms of this matchup. So we spoke about the footwork pattern. The one issue with that footwork pattern is that it is somewhat predictable, of going in, out, side to side. Even though Bivol is masterful at this, it is, as we said, predictable. Another habit I noticed in his last fight was that Bivol would occasionally post out with his jab hand. Now, that seemed to happen more towards the end of the fight, so I'm not sure if that's just a factor of tiredness setting in or why he chose to do that, but that's in my opinion, rather dangerous move to do against a power puncher such as Beterbiev. When you post out with your jab hand, sure, maybe it looks like you're sort of taunting your opponent or you're trying to make it look like you're holding them at bay, but your hand is not in a position to punch, and it's also not in a defensive position when you just got your arm stuck straight out. So you have no offense and you have no defense in the same time. So that's not a good position to be in versus somebody like Artur Beterbiev. Now let's look at the fight when it moves to sort of the mid-range. Now this is where I'm not really sure if Bivol is all that comfortable fighting in that mid-range. He's definitely comfortable fighting on the outside. But when you're in mid-range, you do need to be able to bend at the waist or dip or bob, and Bivol doesn't do that. Again, partly due to the fact that that's just not ingrained as part of the Eastern European tradition. Now, finally, when we get even closer to the inside, Dmitry absolutely does not want to fight on the inside, and he does not. What Bivol does instead of fighting on the inside is he just puts up his high double guard, he rounds his back. That allows him to use his forearms to cover his midsection while keeping his fists up by his head at the same time. And he just shells up and basically stays there. Now that is, well, it's not an impervious defense because you still have that center line open where your opponent could do what we call splitting the guard, meaning they can, if they angle off the right way, they can find an uppercut to the midsection or follow that straight up to the chin. But when you're shelled up like that, you're just doing pure defense. You're basically saying to your opponent, go ahead, hit me as hard as you can. I'll wait till you're done punching, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do next. But you're in absolutely no position to really see the punches coming very well, nor are you in a position to fire back with a shot if you're going to shell up like that. So here's the thing with Team Bivol. If there was one thing that I would say, Bivol could try to work on a little bit, that would have been it for this camp, is to work on his inside game. But it looks like he kept exactly the same coach and didn't add, anybody else to his, in terms of the boxing side of things. His coach, Gennady, now I don't know if he was joking or he was being serious, but when asked about, any changes, his response was, oh, the only thing we need to change for this fight is to get better judges. So yeah, there's the cat. I don't know if he was trying to be humorous or he's actually being sincere when he said that, because I think there's a little bit lost in translation. But I think if Team Bivol wanted to develop Dimitri's mid-range or inside fighting a little bit better, they could have brought in a second coach to kind of work hand in hand with Gennady. So let's take a look at Beterbiev. In terms of defense, Beterbiev favors the double high guard, but his guard is fairly active. He'll block with his forearms. He does very subtle parries or catches, and he does very subtle slipping motions with his head. In terms of footwork, there's a big difference between Bivol's footwork and Beterbiev's footwork. Archer favors more of a relaxed walking stance footwork. He's not bouncing around on the balls of his feet. Now, I did criticize him in the past for almost crossing his feet, meaning bringing his left foot over in front of his right foot as he's moving to his right. But I noticed he really did not do that too much in his last matchup with Dimitri, so I was happy to see that. Now, the one problem with that walking style of fighting is that it is so relaxed and so sort of minimalist that to the untrained eye, it can look like that type of fighter is not, in quotations, doing anything. But I really prefer the economy. It's kind of like that, the Joe Louis sort of philosophy of, well, you can run, but you can't hide. I'll take these small steps towards you, and eventually I'll hunt you down and get you. In terms of offense, I think Archer also has a very strong, powerful jab. He's developed strength, as I said before, from fighting much bigger men. Archer's best weapon, I believe, is overhand right and his tight right uppercut. And in terms of mid-range and inside fighting, Archer is willing to fight at mid-range, and he is also willing to fight on the inside. Now, I will not compare him to any of the great inside fighters like Roberto Duran or Julio Cesar Chavez, but at least Archer's willing to let his opponent know, yeah, we're in a scrap. I'll make it ugly if I have to. Grab an overhook, grab an underhook, and even push you down. Archer's willing to make it, as the Brits say, a proper tear-up. Now, my concerns regarding Archer is at times he does almost appear to be too relaxed, and in a sense that is just perhaps optics. But I mean, he's being scored by human judges, so depending on their interpretation of what they see, sometimes looking so relaxed can work against you. Now, on the other hand, I feel that Arthur does need to figure out how to vary the pace a little bit more in this rematch. I hope he's able to snap himself into another gear when the moment calls for it. I also hope that Artur is able to avoid Dmitri's counter right hand left hook. So how do Dmitri and Artur match up for their rematch? Well, clearly I think both men should stick to their strengths, and in Bivol's case, that's certainly playing the role of the boxer and making great use of his jab straight right hand. As soon as Dmitri is able to land a significant right hand, he should definitely follow up because he's great at just stringing combinations together. If he's even able to start getting some momentum and start pushing Beterbiev back again, like as he did in moments during their first fight, I think that will definitely play in his favor. It's unlikely that Dmitri is going to develop much more power on his punches, as an aside, particularly because he has a terrible strength coach. But that's just not the type of fighter that he is anyways. He develops his strength in quotation from the volume of his combination punching. Provided that Dmitri has terrific conditioning, which I expect him to, if he just decides to play the role of being the outside fighter, he could eke out a decision versus Beterbiev. It may not make for the most exciting fight, but this is the gamification. If he can gamify this, he might be able to edge out a decision. I don't know that we can ask for much more from Beterbiev-Bivol, other than to just max out at what he does the best, which is to move in and out, side to side, land those hard 1-2s, and when he does land a 2, just follow up with a 20-punch combination. Now, on the other hand, I would like to see a little bit of a revision from Artur Beterbiev, because I do feel he's capable of adding another wrinkle to his game. Specifically, Artur should really work at figuring out how to cut off the ring on Dmitri and make better use of those 45-degree angles to do so. Now, to get there, Beterbiev will also have to be able to vary his pace a little bit, because he's going to have to be deceptive in how he sets up cutting to those angles. From a little bit of the behind-the-scenes footage, I think it's called Welcome to My Gym, it did look like one of Artur's coaches was encouraging him to use his footwork to create angles. Now, once he's in range, I really hope Artur makes really good use of his body shots. In the first matchup, Artur's coach was actually calling for more body work from him. That will definitely put a damper in Bivol being able to move around the ring as much as Bivol wants to. One specific shot that could work well for Artur is if he's able to time Dmitri's right hand, he can throw a right hand to the body simultaneously. Now, on a side note, I feel that Beterbiev has a fantastic strength coach. You won't hear me say that very often, if at all, about any of the strength coaches that are involved in boxing, because honestly, most of them are garbage. But Artur's coach, I would train with him. I think he's really professional at what he does. I think he will have addressed any sort of rehab type issues that Artur might have had. I believe he will address any weak areas he sees in Artur. I think he will have him peaking perfectly for this fight. I'm sure he will help Artur optimize his body composition, and he'll help him make weight. Now, on the other hand, I also think that Beterbiev-Bivol's horrible strength coach will not help him make weight very well, because if he lacks so much knowledge in terms of weight training, I don't expect that he has, superb knowledge in the area of nutrition and cutting weight. Now, I like to talk about mindset also when I evaluate fighters, and in this case, I think they're equal. Both Artur and Dmitri have that Eastern European stoicism about them. the refreshing thing is I think they're both going to be respectful of each other. I think they don't necessarily speak their emotions, and that's fine. I don't really want to see another cliched weigh-in stare down where somebody shoves somebody or says something rude about the other person's family members or something. Both Artur and Dmitry are highly disciplined, they're resilient, they're durable, and they're respectable. So that's really refreshing, for once in the fight game. Now, having said all that, I will make my prediction, and I'm going to say Beterbiev by knockout. That's the same prediction I made the first time, but the reason is I do think that in one camp, it's possible for Artur to add those couple of wrinkles that I'm calling for, which is to work the angles with his footwork and to focus on how to set up those body shots. I think that's an achievable shift in one training camp. On the other hand, I don't think that Bivol can really shift that much and add that much to his game. I feel he could sharpen up what he already has, but at this point, he's so sort of ingrained in his limitations and his strengths that really all he can do is build on his strengths. So that's my pre-fight breakdown for Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol, the rematch. I say Artur Beterbiev by KO or TKO in the later rounds. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please do subscribe, hit the notification bell, and consider joining our channel as a member. Let us know your prediction for the fight in the comments. Thanks again.